All right. Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday. My name is Jacqueline. I'm the community manager at Nordic Innovation House Singapore. So welcome to the Nordic Health Virtual Market Entry Program knowledge sharing session in partnership with the Southeast Asia IP SME Help Desk. So today we have Nora Bihari and also James Kinrad to share with us more about uh, their organization and also going in depth about IP rights in Southeast Asia. So thanks for joining us today, and we hope this will be a very insightful session for our Nordic companies over here. So if you have questions for them, feel free to put it in the chat. There will be some poll questions along the way by James. So we can also use the chat to answer those poll questions as well. So questions wise will be at the end of the presentation. So feel free to ask as much question as you can. All right, so I'll hand over to both Nora and James to present.
Okay, thank you, Jacqueline. So hello, everyone. It's my pleasure, our pleasure to be here with you and have a brief discussion with Nordic companies who are exploring the Singaporean market. And today you will hear more about how you can protect your IP in the healthcare sector in Singapore. And it's important to think about your IP as an integral part of your business strategy. And the presenter will be James Kinrad. He's our external expert of the Southeast Asia IPR SME Helpdesk project and also a patent attorney based in Singapore. But before giving the floor to James, let me just give you a very quick introduction to our project. So the Southeast Asia IP SME Helpdesk project is an initiative of the European Commission, and we support small and medium-sized enterprises and startups from the EU to protect their IP when expanding their business to Southeast Asia. It's very important to note that it's a free of charge services that we provide. And really the goal is to assist companies at an early stage of their business expansion, making sure that they have all relevant information that they need to know about their IP strategy. So on this slide, you can see the services. So we have an inquiry helpline. This is something that is available for you to use even after the presentation. If you come across any kind of IP concerns you have, or you want us to take a look at your IP clause in the contract, or you just need to check registration costs, timeline, you can contact the help desk via email, phone, or schedule an online meeting with us, and we will be happy to assist you. We also provide a wide range of publications, which is available on our website that you can download. So for example, we have an IP fact sheet on Singapore. We also have an IP guide on the medical industry, what you need to know, and also other types of guides that could be relevant for you to have a look. And then we organize trainings like today's session across the year. So feel free to sign up any other events that we will have in the near future. And we offer some interactive learning tools such as e-learning modules, videos, podcasts that you can also check on our website. And I think that's all from my side. And now I would give the floor to James to give you more insight on this topic. Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks very much, Nora. Pleased to meet you all by electronic means. And just as a little bit background on myself, I'm a partner in Marks & Clark Singapore. I've been here since 2013, and before that I trained as a chemist, so I've got a degree and PhD in chemistry. I followed that up with postdoctoral work in the US, in New York, unfortunately in 2001. And then after that I worked as medicinal chemist in Pfizer for a couple of years before I joined the profession in 2005. I'm qualified in Singapore, the UK, and also if I was in Europe or the UK, which is still part of the European Patents Convention, I would also be a European patent attorney, which that's in abeyance at the moment because I'm here in Singapore. Okay, so as an agenda today, I'm going to give you an introduction to the main concepts of IP, the main types of IP. then a little recap, which is where the poll questions come in to try to get you to think about the issues of getting basically 360-degree protection for any type of IP that you have. Then there'll be an introduction to Singapore as a country and its setting within the ASEAN region. Then how IP operates in Singapore and some case studies as well. Okay, so what is intellectual property? Well, it's basically the protection of intangible assets. And there's various types of intellectual property that kind of operate together to give you protection across all the different types of intellectual endeavors that you might think about. So the first one I'm going to mention is copyright. And that can be the written word. So that would go towards a novel like the Da Vinci Code. It can be recorded performances, it's music, it's film, it's potentially software. The copyright in software is the code behind the software, and art. Generally speaking, there will be a time limit set on copyright. It normally lasts beyond the life of the author. So if you're talking about the written words or written music, etc., you're normally talking about up to 70 years from the death of the artist, which is why I think in was it Nick Hornby's movie About a Boy, Hugh Grant's character basically lives off his father's royalties for a Christmas song. And that's how copyright effectively works. It's a bit different for recorded performances because the copyright there maybe only lasts for 50 years. So you've now got people in the UK like Cliff Richard complaining that their copyrights run out and they're not getting royalties anymore for things that they did 50 years ago because they're now 60 or 70 years plus. And the reason I've got the Da Vinci Code here was that there was quite a large case, a copyright case on the book. And that was to do with the fact that a central part of the plot of this book is focused on something called the Priory of Sion. And there was a book called The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail written in the 1980s by authors. And that was effectively all of their research was leading towards the idea of exactly the Priory of Sion. And that was taken by Dan Brown and used as a central plot element of the book. Actually, the publisher of the Da Vinci Code was the same publisher of The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. So from them, it was relatively expensive publicity, but still publicity nonetheless for both the current book and the older book written in the 1980s. So it was a nice, I think basically at the end of the day, it was decided that taking something and using it as a plot point did not infringe the copyright of the earlier work. But nevertheless, it was a boost in sales for both books during the time of the court case. Okay, the next thing I'm going to touch on is trademarks. What trademarks seek to do is allow you to identify that you are the person that's providing a particular product or service. And that if someone buys something where you've marked your logo or whatever on it, they should have a guarantee that they know it's coming from you. And you should also have the ability to prevent others from using the mark as well. Trademarks are generally registerable rights. And so it's much, much easier to enforce a trademark if you have a registered right. In Singapore, Singapore is a common law country, so it also has this concept of passing off. So even if you do not have a registered trademark, it is possible to enforce your sort of goodwill that you've built up and your reputation if someone else tries to say that they are associated with you when they're not. So that is possible to do, but it's much more expensive. And most countries in Southeast Asia do not have the passing off right, like most of Europe. So if you want to get protection and secure protection, it's much better to get a trademark. The forms of trademarks are quite varied, as you can see here. So you can have a word mark or a logo. You can have colors. So I'm using the Tiffany box here to represent that. I'm not entirely sure if that's blue or green or somewhere in between. But you get the idea that particular colors can be associated with a brand, especially if that color is used consistently over time. And so this would be a particular Pantone color that's registered as a trademark for jewelry services, etc. If you were to take away the logo Coca-Cola, and you were just to see a silhouette of that, I guess 90% of you, if not more, would recognize that as a Coca-Cola bottle. And so again, a shape can be trademarked. Smells can also be trademarked. As long as it can be written down and described in some way, then it can be done. So for instance, someone could trademark the smell of new cut grass for selling tennis balls. And I think there may have been a company that tried to do that. So the idea basically is that you can, as long as it can be written down in a way that conveys what the meaning is, then it's possible to get a trademark for it. You can have a jingle. So a Mars a day helps you work, rest, and play. Or have a break, have a Kit Kat. And it can also be a gesture. So a famous one in the UK, though maybe not so famous now, well, certainly if you're Scottish like me, not English, was a company called the Derbyshire Building Society had a gesture mark for financial services, which was touching the nose 3 times. And they had lots of adverts for that. And that was fantastic for them. It really worked well for them. And so they were able to trademark that as something associated with their business. And that prevented anyone else using that for financial services in the UK at least. Now, designs. Here, I've only got one thing as a design, really, or 2 things as a design. And I've got the Stormtrooper helmet. And part of the reason for that is that designs are generally protecting the way that something looks. And that could be the shape, the contours, the colors, the lines, textures, materials, etc., that are listed here. It's generally quite a good form of protection, and it can last for up to 25 years in some countries. Again, there is, in Europe, there's an unregistered right, and in the UK, there's an unregistered right, but I don't think there's such things in Singapore. So if you want to get protection for a design, you need to register it here. It's very quick to get a design in Singapore. I applied for 2 last week or the week before, and it took less than a week for them to come back and say, yes, you've now got a design. So it's relatively quick to get. However, the protection that you get is relatively limited because it's limited to the way the thing looks. So if someone can make a similar product that looks different enough, then you don't have protection. And that's where patents come in. Because what patents do is they help to protect the underlying concept broadly, so that if you've got, say, you're the first person to come up with a mobile phone, or you're the first person to come up with a drug, you can stop other people doing that for a set period of time. And that's because the patent system internationally is based on an idea of being a deal between the state and the applicant. And so the inventors disclose the invention to the public, but for that, you get a right to stop others to work that particular invention for up to 20 years. And so that means that no one else can use that particular invention until your patent expires. And if you've got a foundational patent, that can give you very strong control over a particular area. So again, using a mobile phone as an example, the first person to get a mobile phone patent potentially controlled the entire market. And say someone else comes along later and develops a camera phone, well, that's patentable over the mobile phone patent. However, until and unless the mobile phone patent expires, the camera phone people can't make the phone, their camera phone. However, the same is true for the mobile phone people. They can't make a camera phone without infringing the other patent. And that's why in the mobile space in particular, you find that there are standards and that people will then align their patents to the standard so that they get a share of royalties. Now, to get a patent granted, an invention has to be novel, it has to be inventive, and it has to be capable of industrial application. One thing that a patent does do is it prevents others from being able to reverse engineer your product. So say you've got a product on the market and you think no one can reverse engineer it, that's fine. That's trade secrets, which you'll discuss in a second. But if it's something that people can look at, take apart, disassemble, and work out how it works, or they can do analysis or chemical analysis or whatever to find out what the active ingredients are, then it's relatively easy for them to reverse engineer and start selling. And that's where patents come in particularly. Trade secrets is the last type of protection. It's one that doesn't cost you any money, so it's fantastic, but it doesn't work for everything. And the reason why I've got here, this used to be an example, I don't know if it is anymore, for trade secret, was the recipe for the Colonel's chicken for KFC, or Kentucky Fried Chicken. The idea is that as long as no one else knows that recipe, then you have effectively perpetual protection for that intellectual property. However, if someone lets slip the secret, you can potentially sue that person, but once the secret is out there in the public domain, everyone else can use it and copy it. And I think that might have happened to KFC because people have been able to analyze the ingredients and work out probably what the recipe is, or get a close enough approximation to it. Another good example of that would be Coca-Cola as well. So I just had a quick question about the patent application for a golf ball flotation device. This is actually a US design, but nonetheless, it could have been a patent. So the idea here is that you've got a life jacket on a golf ball. Is it novel? Well, life jackets themselves aren't necessarily novel, but you could have a claim to a life jacket size to fit round about a golf ball. Then that would be fine. That would be novel. Is it inventive? Well, arguably yes, because who else has come up with a device that works for golf balls? Exactly how this would work practically, I don't know. You'd probably have to have it round about the golf ball, so it's going to have effects on how it flies, which is probably why it never really caught on, unless it's just for a novelty. And it's capable of industrial application because you can manufacture these and you can sell them and they can be fitted to golf balls. So overall, it is patentable. Going back to trade secrets, as I say, it's about keeping the invention or the idea secret. So the recipe for a particular thing like KFC, like Coca-Cola, once it gets out, it's a problem. And so pharmaceuticals are not things that you would want to protect by trade secrets, because as soon as you sell the product, people can analyze it, reverse engineer what the active ingredient is, and then start copying you. So it's much more useful for things like processes or products that are difficult to copy, or even products that have a short shelf life. I mean, getting a patent normally takes somewhere between 2 and 5 years in most countries, some countries longer. So if your product's only going to last on the market for a couple of years, then is there really a point getting a patent? That's up for you guys to decide. But as I say, trademarks are more vulnerable than patents because as soon as the secret's out, then it's available for everyone to use. So here is the first poll question.
Yes.
How would you think you could provide, how do you think you would protect this device on the right-hand side? So if you could use the chat box to provide answers, that'd be great.
Yep. So Nordic companies, you may use the chat to put in your answer for this poll. So how would you protect this item? A, patents, B, trademarks, C, designs, or D, all of the above? Seems like the answer is D, James.
Yep, I would say that in this case, yes, it's pretty much all of the above. Generally speaking, you have to go back to, if this was a brand new product, then the idea of having the rotating 3-headed shaver would be new. It would be inventive because no one else had come up with it before, and it would be capable of industrial application, so it would be patentable. Even though that might be known, there could be other features like making it wet shave compatible or making it feel closer or better in terms of its performance. Those could still make it a patentable invention. Like there's features here that may relate to new inventions. It doesn't necessarily have to be just to do with the head. And it's the same with mobile phones. You've got 4G, you've now got 5G. There will be 6G in the future. Each of those will have new inventions that are incorporated into the phones. So even though the phone doesn't necessarily look any different, internally there's new technologies involved. You've got trademarks available here. So you've got Philips, maybe that logo, localized 7 is trademarked. The wording down there might be trademarked. You've got designs because you can protect the shape. One thing that's interesting is that back about 10 years ago, Philly Shave had or attempted to trademark the three-headed razor blade here. They were able to get trademarks in a number of countries, but not in all. And so there was a score sheet back in the day showing which countries had allowed a trademark and which one didn't. I think in Europe, we did not end up, or they did not end up getting a trademark because it was determined that because they'd already got patent protection for this idea, they shouldn't then get trademark protection for it as well. But other countries thought differently. And one of the advantages of a trademark is that it's perpetual. So UK trademark number 1 is still in existence today. It's more than 100 years old. And it's a little red triangle to Bass breweries for alcoholic products. And if you look at any can of Bass or its associated breweries, you will see somewhere on it a little red triangle. And that's the way you keep a trademark alive is A, you need to use it, and B, you need to keep on paying the renewal fees. So it's possible to have trademarks that go for hundreds of years. Okay, second one, how would you protect this?
So you can put your answers in the chat. Would it be A, B, C, or D?
So as a clue, I could have used Coca-Cola equally instead.
D? So far, three
Yep.
has answered D.
Okay. So if we're dealing with the recipe, I'll start with the recipe first. You can't have a patent and a trade secret. You can have one or the other. I've chosen Iron Brew because I'm Scottish and Iron Brew is made in Scotland from girders, which relates to the trademark. But initially, they had IRON Brew, BREW, but they were forced to change in the 1940s because the Advertising Standards Commission in the UK said there isn't enough iron in your Iron Brew to be able to call it Iron Brew. So they came up with a new way of phrasing it, so IRN BRU, to get round about that. And so there's trademarks associated with that. But the recipe for the drink, I think at any one time, only 3 people know it. And like the royal family in the UK, they do not travel, often do not travel on the same plane at the same time to make sure that the recipe doesn't get lost. Okay, and the third one here, if you can give me your answers or what you think might be the answers.
We have A, or C. Are we supposed to only have choose one answer? Is there only one correct answer?
No, you can choose as many as you like, and then I can go through them.
Okay, great. So mostly it's just A and the C.
Okay. The answer to this one is that it kind of depends. Like I say, generally you can only have a patent or a trade secret. And here it depends how the software is written. Is it open source? Is it closed source? Is it possible for people to look at how everything operates together and then work out how each of the components interact with each other and then reverse engineer it? If it's possible to reverse engineer, then a trade secret is not going to get you anything. You need to go for a patent. There are potentially issues with getting patents for software, and I'll talk about that later on. Designs are not important here. Trademarks, potentially, yes, not necessarily to the software itself, but there could be branding for the software, branding for the company associated with it, to say this is a product coming from Microsoft or Alphabet or whoever. And so trademarks certainly play a role. Trade secrets could play a role, and certainly patents can play a role as well, but designs not so much. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about now is Singapore, and try to put Singapore into context in the ASEAN region, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which are the countries listed below here. So I'm not going to go through all of them. But this is the population slide for ASEAN. You can see that by 2018, there were more than 600 million people in the region. So it is a very big populous region. It's significantly bigger as a bloc than the EU, particularly now, unfortunately, that the UK has left. It's also significantly bigger than the US in terms of population size. Most of that population, as you can see, a significant proportion is Indonesia, and another significant block is in the Philippines, and then Thailand and Vietnam. Singapore, you can just about see there, it's about 5 million people. So the population of Singapore is roughly the same size as Scotland. It's got a much higher density of population than Scotland, but in terms of the number of people, it's about the same size as Scotland. Now we look at GDP. You can see a big difference. So Indonesia is still a big component of the ASEAN mix, but look at the size of Singapore. For 5 million people, it's equal to the population or production of GDP compared to the Philippines, which has a significantly larger population. And it's not significantly different necessarily to Vietnam or to Thailand either. I think Thailand's population is about 70 million, which is about the same size as the UK. So you can see that for such a small country, the GDP it produces is huge. And that's partly down to relatively high-paying jobs in the country. It's also down to other things which are a little bit crazy. So if you take luxury goods, and the Swiss like their watches or like to export watches, the number 9 market for watches worldwide, or maybe even higher, is Singapore. Singapore is more important in terms of the selling of Swiss watches than the UK is. So it is a very affluent market. Healthcare services, because of that, you tend to find that healthcare costs are relatively high here. And there's quite a lot of innovation within the healthcare space as well. Now, Singapore has just announced a new 25 billion Singapore dollar 5-year plan for research and development. This covers the 4 areas here, but I've highlighted the 2 that I think are most relevant to the companies today. Obviously, the human health one is definitely related to what you guys do, but I saw that a large number of you are related in some ways towards software and cloud-based technologies, which is why I think the services and digital economy also could play a role here as well. In terms of the overarching plan for the next 10 years, human health and services and digital economy play a significant role there as well. So areas that they're looking at are digital portals and telehealth and assistive technology and robotics as well. Because they're cognizant of the fact that their population is aging, and so they need to make sure that they have things in place to help as their population ages. In terms of the IP regime here, the Intellectual Property Office of Singapore has been asked to try to make sure that their IP system is welcoming and helps to foster artificial intelligence innovations as well. And so hopefully, as things progress over the next 10 years, Singapore will hopefully be at the forefront of making sure that their IP system helps to support AI inventions. Now, Singapore has a free trade agreement with the EU. That was signed in 2018. And one other thing just to note is that if you are looking at establishing some sort of footprint in the region, Singapore is quite a good place to do it. There are quite a large number of mechanisms in forms of tax deductions, etc., for setting up R&D, etc., within the region. And if you want to know more about that, I think you can probably try to speak to IE Singapore. Okay, so how do you obtain intellectual property in Singapore? Well, unfortunately, intellectual property is territorial. So a European patent that you've got that covers Germany or a US trademark means absolutely nothing in Singapore in terms of its effectiveness. If you want to stop other people using your intellectual property or stop copies in Singapore, only way you can do it is to have protection in Singapore. And that's the same for the rest of the entire region as well. So what I would normally say is one reason to get protection in Singapore is that Singapore itself has a major market potential for your business. And for that, I would say, if you're looking at making profits of more than about $500,000 Singapore dollars a year, then patent protection is going to be useful because the patent protection is not going to cost you anywhere near that amount of money. And it will help you prevent other people accessing the market for a year or 2 years. So it's giving you an extra year or 2 years to make profit before other people can actually get in the market if you decide to challenge, or if you go after them for infringement and they decide to challenge your patent for validity. Getting protection in Singapore is relatively quick. Certainly compared to Europe, it can be extremely quick. And it's also strategic as well. And the reason I say that is that getting a patent in Singapore may also help you get patents more easily or more quickly in the region as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. One thing also to say is that before filing say you file in Europe first, or you file in your home country first, you can then file a patent cooperation treaty application, which is an international application. And if you want more information on that, please look at the link here. And that will give you more information from the SME Helpdesk on how the PCT system works. Okay, so as I mentioned, Singapore, it can be very, very quick to get a patent. There is a fast track scheme in Singapore to get grants really quickly. It used to be only for certain technologies such as artificial intelligence and fintech, but it's now open to any technology whatsoever. If you go for this scheme, then you can get grant in Singapore within 6 months. And I'll talk about how that could potentially benefit you and a broader strategy later on. If you've got technology that's fast moving, like AI and fintech, so particularly AI, if you're a healthcare company that has AI investments, you might not be using the same technology in a couple of years' time. But if you want to get protection fast, then you can get protection in Singapore relatively quickly. Unfortunately, this fast track scheme is limited to 5 cases a month at the moment. We're trying to get the Intellectual Property Office to open up more. I can tell you from personal experience, this means that you have to get up or you have to not go to bed until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning to make sure you get your filing done on the 1st of the month. And that can involve getting 2 or 3 people to stay up with you to make sure everything gets done in time. It's not the most fun I've ever had. But there's also a 12 months to grant scheme as well, which normally means that you would get some sort of readout within 6 months. And that can mean that you can get grants relatively quickly in Singapore as well, should that be of benefit to you. Now, the requirements for both schemes are that the application has to be first filed in Singapore or has no priority tie. So what this means is that you could file your first application in Europe, and then your attorney could then say, okay, well, we want to make use of the fast track scheme. They can then give us the application and we can file the same thing, but without claiming priority. And so it doesn't have to be exactly the first filed application. The application cannot have more than 20 claims. If you're getting it done by a European attorney, they're probably looking at having 15 to 20 claims anyway. So that shouldn't be a problem. You do need to respond very quickly to formalities issues, but those are relatively straightforward to deal with. And so that shouldn't be an issue. It says 2 weeks, but we'll be able to deal with them quickly. And you need to respond to official objections. That's objections raised by the Patent Office to substantive matters like novelty and inventive step within 2 months. That's a bit harder to deal with, but it is possible. Okay. And Chinese companies are using this all the time in Singapore. Alibaba, for instance, got grant within 3 months for one of their technologies. I've personally filed cases for Chinese companies where they have been granted within less than 6 months. So it is a very fast scheme that can benefit you if you're in a fast-moving technology area. And one of the reasons I say that is that if you file in Singapore first, you get your allowance really quickly within 6 months. You can then expedite examination. So either you file the PCT application or you decide to go into Europe and the US without filing a PCT application, but directly into those countries. You can use something called the Patent Prosecution Highway, and you can use the result in Singapore to drive that process. So you can get really quick examination in those countries really quickly. For ASEAN countries, so Thailand, Vietnam, etc., there's a system called ASPEC. I cannot remember what the acronym stands for, but basically it's an acceleration program. So getting grant in Singapore allows you to get really fast examination in these countries. And that can be important because if you look at Thailand, generally speaking, examination in Thailand can take up to 10 years before you get your first readout on patentability. If your technology is not going to be here in 10 years' time, that's not of any benefit to you. So you want to make sure that you can get things moving in some of these countries like Thailand, the Philippines, and Indonesia relatively quickly. Some of these ones will also accept grant in the US or Europe as a way to get things accelerated as well. In terms of enforcement, what I'd say is that Singapore has a specialized IP court. So the judges are relatively familiar with IP. The same in Malaysia, Thailand, in the Philippines, and a little bit in Indonesia as well. The speed of litigation is about the same as the speed of grant. So Singapore is relatively fast. You can probably get things done within 18 months to 2 years. That should include the appeal. Malaysia is relatively fast as well, but Thailand and Indonesia can be relatively slow. So it's about choosing the courts or the venues that make sense to you. Now, because a lot of you guys seem to be doing sort of cloud-based stuff, I think it's worth talking about computer-based inventions. And if your local attorney, I've said European attorney here, but any sort of attorney drafting for the European Patent Office thinks that your claims will be patentable in Europe, then they will be patentable in Singapore as well. and variations of along those ideas will also be patentable in other countries in the region as well. One thing I would say is that it's very important to ask your attorney to include computer readable medium claims, because it's not clear whether supply of a software to someone here will be considered an infringement of a system or just method claims as well. So your patent attorneys should know what that means. But there is one important caveat to consider, and that leads me on to the first case study. Excuse me 1 second. Okay, so although this is a healthcare session, I saw that a large number of you had technology that related to sort of cloud-based services. So what happens if your claim only relates to the entirety of the product or the service that you're providing? So all of your claims cover the clients based in Singapore and the server contained in Austria. In Europe, that's generally not an issue because you've got this thing called contributory infringement, which means that you can have two separate components, or someone's supplying an essential element of the component to induce other people to infringe. And that allows you to sue the person who's inducing the infringement, who would normally be the person who's the most at fault. Unfortunately, Singapore does not have the equivalent part of the law. Singapore's law is based on the UK law, but they deliberately left out contributory infringement from the Singapore law. So if you've got a claim that covers everything and only everything, then you cannot enforce that patent easily in Singapore. So you need to make sure that when your attorney is drafting claims, they only cover, or they have some claims that relate only to the clients, if the clients are going to be the only thing in Singapore, or only to the server, if the server is going to be the thing that's in Singapore. So this is an important thing to make sure that your attorneys capture within the application. If they don't, then it's going to be very difficult to enforce a patent here. And that doesn't just apply to Singapore, that applies quite generally to the rest of the region as well. Okay, this is a sort of more of a trademark one. If you have a local partner and you're trusting your local partner, then that's fine, but make sure you register your trademark. It's cheap to do. It's really cheap to do in Singapore. You can even do it on an app now, because if you don't register it, they will. And that can be fine as long as the business relationship lasts and there's never any issues. But what happens if the agreement goes sour? I was looking at some trademark cases recently, and there's one was about Harvard University and a club here using the name Harvard University Alumni Club. They set up an agreement back in the 60s, and everything was fine until last year when the relationship broke down. And so there was issues with Harvard trying to get their name back to then develop their own alumni club in Singapore, separate to the entity that had run it for the last 40 or 50 years. So it's really important to consider, if you're going to do business here, it's not expensive to get trademark protection, get it yourself. And that applies much more to other countries within the region as well. Okay, so some just takeaway messages. Singapore has a small population, yes, but it's a high-tech, high-value focused society. It's got a large GDP, and I think the earnings per capita are above those of the US, to give it some perspective. And we're not talking here a little bit above the US, it's almost double from recollection. Singapore is also a regional hub, and so that can help you both in terms of getting a footprint on the ground and getting into the region, but also helping you to accelerate IP grant in the region. Protection here is relatively fast and relatively cheap. And I would also say that the courts in Singapore are generally quite friendly to the IP owner as well. It's not necessarily like the UK, where you get the impression that the courts are not so friendly towards the owner of the IP. The courts here are generally quite friendly to IP owners. So that's the talk finished. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now.
Oh, okay. Yes, Riku.
Hey, I want to make this first question here. So based on what you just described, so Singapore seems to work and then the region works. But if you think about kind of potential challenges of getting entrepreneurial people trying to steal your trademark or patent or your ideas, when you compare Singapore, emerging markets, emerging countries in Southeast Asia, Europe, and the rest of the world, how would you kind of compare these places? Because everywhere people try to steal ideas. And
undoubtedly. What I would say is that Singapore, if you go to a trade show in Singapore, the chances of you then finding people trying to steal your trademark it's unlikely to be someone from Singapore who's trying to do that. What you might find is that someone's come from the Philippines or Vietnam or Myanmar or Thailand, and then they go back to the country and think that's a fantastic idea, and then they start copying. And so that's something that I think Nora can probably talk about quite a lot, is that you would find that definitely when it comes to trademark ideas or trademarks, there's a lot of copying or registration that goes on. So people will go to a trade show, they will see your brand, and then they will copy your brand and register it in their country. So when you go to try and register it, you can't. So what I would always say is that if you are coming to the region and you have a plan for which countries you're most interested in, I would certainly think about trying to get your trademark registered in advance. In terms of patents, it's easy. If you haven't got patent protection already, generally speaking, unless it was relatively recent you apply for your patent, you're not going to get it. But if you then got other things that you are interested in, then it's worthwhile making sure that you consider your overall strategy to make sure that your business goals align with your IP goals. So if you're interested in Southeast Asia, do make sure that you're protecting yourself in Southeast Asia before you enter the market.
Okay, great. We have a question for you, James, from Mika from Pro Wellness. Hi, Mika.
Good
Hi.
afternoon.
Hi, would you like to just ask your question?
Yeah, I was just trying to actually go to the chat. So I was just curious about IP being regional, and if you see any reason or any justification for applying for a patent, even if you currently don't have market presence in the region.
Okay, good question. Yeah. So the question is there any reason to get a patent in Singapore or regionally in the area if you don't have a market presence here? The thing to remember is that a patent lasts 20 years, potentially. So if you don't have a market presence here, are you going to have one in the next 5 to 10 years? Or do you have plans to have one in the next 5 to 10 years? And is the product that you have got a PCT application for, is that going to enter? Would that be one of the things that you would look at having on the market in Singapore or regionally? If the answer to that is yes, then it probably is worthwhile getting yourself aligned now to make sure you've got patent protection, because if you have something that's really important and valuable to you, that is then going to form the core of your business, and you enter into the region without patent protection, then you are potentially inviting copies to get on the market relatively quickly, especially when you've got countries like Thailand in particular that are very good in the healthcare space. And so they could copy you relatively quickly and easily, and then you would have effectively a generic on the market to compete against you, at least in the region.
Great. Thank you so much, Mika, for the question. Alvin, I see you raised your hand.
Yeah. So, for example, Helpdesk and a few companies here using AI, right? So, what's the justification of applying patent for AI when you can't even force another company of a similar product to, compare the code? You can't even compare the code. So why bother patenting an AI solution?
What do you mean by compare the quotes?
It's like you can't prove whether another similar sepsis prediction algorithm is similar to ours, right? Yeah.
That's the difference between copyright and patents.
Oh, okay.
Copyright is the code, which is the algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make any difference if they're using, if their technology has to operate along similar lines to what yours is. So that it has to follow a processing technique that's similar to yours, even though it may differ in some respects. If your claims are drafted broadly enough, and that's why you get patent attorneys involved, patent attorneys try to draft claims that will capture easy variants of your process or your technology so that it stops others doing so. And so it then potentially reverses the burden of proof. So instead of you having to prove it, you can say, well, look, here's the evidence that we've got. They do the same thing that we do. They're going to be infringing our patent. And so patents can be relatively powerful in stopping it, because what I would say generally is that a patent is the protection of an idea that is industrially applicable. So it's the concept behind the idea that you're protecting, not just one way of doing it, but lots of different ways of doing it.
But then if I patent it, I will have to share what is inside my code.
Exactly.
So then it doesn't give us an advantage. Maybe, 2 years later, then everyone will have the code.
Well, that's where this is the sort of the puzzle that you have to solve. Is your code going to be something that's going to form the foundation of technology for 15 to 20 years or 10 to 15 years? Or is it something you're going to use 2 years and then throw away? I mean, to give you an example, Apple got a patent granted in the US for code that basically HTML highlighted telephone numbers. And they got that, say, 5 years ago. And there was lots of comments at the time as well. How can Apple get this? Because Google have been doing this for years. And yes, Google had been doing this for years. But at the time that the application was applied for, Google did not exist. And so it was not new and it was inventive. It took 15 or 16 years to get the patent granted, but they were then in a position to enforce it quite strongly if they'd wanted to against Google and other companies who used that technology. I don't think they did, but they would have had the ability to do so. So it's about the concept and getting protection for the concept and a way of doing it. We, generally speaking, patents do not include, even for AI, they do not include the source code. They disclose a way of working. They give enough information for someone to be able to work the invention. And if you look at any AI patent, they will not go into significant detail on the actual source code, but they will set out how each processing step takes place.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. We have about 5 minutes left. Is any other questions from the Nordic companies to James or Nora?
Jacqueline, I have one comment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, James, for the presentation, and also hear that there were some questions. We discussed briefly about trademarks, so I just wanted to mention that we have a guide on the Madrid system, which allows you to register your trademark in multiple countries. So it's an international system. So I will copy in the chat box the link for this guide. So if any of you want to get more information on how Madrid system works, feel free to check out. And if you have questions, you can contact us for clarification.
Okay, great. So I don't think anyone else has.
Okay.
And yes, Rico.
One more. Yeah.
Sure.
And Nora, you are in Hanoi in Vietnam. So about trademarks.
I'm in Ho Chi Minh City.
Oh, sorry, Ho Chi Minh City.
Vietnam.
Yeah. Okay, yes. Yeah, Vietnam. Yeah. So when thinking about these companies, now hearing what we are discussing, so most of them are new to the market and they are now planning their roadmap for how to conquer Southeast Asia and what is Singapore's role there. So how important would you say that the trademark would be to kind of secure in all of these countries? So is it important or not when we are talking about health technologies and healthcare solutions?
Well, I think I echo James that it's important to protect your trademark at the point when you are kind of willing to do business in the country, and you should do it at an early stage, because once your name is known and you already built some business contacts and then you think about registering your trademark, then it might be too late. So usually we recommend to companies that in the process, when you start discussing with distributors, you take care of your trademark registration. Of course, you cannot register in every country in the world. So probably the strategy should be which countries are the riskiest, where you face a danger, which are the countries where you are really serious about doing business, and decide it based on that. And compared to patent, trademark is quite, let's say, I don't want to say cheap, because when it comes to many countries, it adds up. But in Vietnam, for example, the official fee is 55 euros. So it's something that companies should consider. So that's our recommendation. Do it early, so before it's too late. And yes, actually, I met several companies at trade fairs who, there was one example, a German company who told us that he got copied by, his trademark was copied by a Vietnamese in Indonesia, in the trade fair in Indonesia, and they registered their trademark in Vietnam. And then when they came to Vietnam and they wanted to negotiate with the company, they said that, okay, we give it back to you for 50,000 euro. So this is the so-called bad face registration, which is not uncommon. So it's important to be aware.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we have same examples that we have heard similar kind of things from Finnish companies regarding Vietnam and many other countries. Thanks.
Great. All right. Since there's no more other questions, or in the future, if you have any questions related to IPR, feel free to connect with Nora or James. Definitely, they can provide more useful information. We will be sharing the recording and also the slides that James has presented, so you can rewatch it and take notes about it. Other than that, if you want to get connected with them, let me know and I can share their email addresses with you. Hope that's okay with James and Nora. Yep. And yeah, other than that, thank you so much for spending a 1 hour session with us. I hope the Nordic companies will find it useful for trademarking their and patenting their solutions as well. All right. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Yep, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Nice day.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.